Now that we've culled and we've chosen the pictures that we absolutely don't want to have, now I'm going to kind of go back through and look at the ones that I do want to have. Like I said before, I go methodically. I may not go through and delete all the ones right away that I don't want. I may just go through in little sets. I've got a couple sets of, like for this session in front of us, of them laying on the ground. I may have some that I absolutely don't like the pose. I'll go ahead and get rid of right then. I won't move on to the next quote-unquote set until I'm actually done editing this. For me, I compartmentalize. It's easier for me to move from boom, 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 as opposed to move from A to F, back to B, back to D. In this way, I don't lose any pictures in my mind. Alright, so I've shown you guys before how to edit in RAW, but in this case, I'm going to show you more of a biased view. Before, when I showed you, it was just basically showing you how the sliders worked. This time, I actually want to show you how I edit. So it may be a little bit of overlap, but it's not going to be that long. So the very first thing you need to notice here that I've noticed with my camera, it's going to be different with every camera. My camera shoots very cool. A lot of it has to do with my white balance. I use auto white balance. Hate to admit it. Sometimes I use custom, but a lot of times when I'm moving quickly through sessions, I auto because I know I can one-click change in RAW. Do I think that's the best way to do it? No, but for this session in front of me, that's what I did. I did auto white balance, which made it to be a little bit more of a cooler picture. I'm okay with that. I warm up my pictures no matter what. Anyways, I was going to say, even if they're warm, which is true, I pretty much always add a little bit more warmth, a little more oomph, and a little bit more feeling to the picture. So anyway, so look at the picture we have in front of us. We have Summer and Nate. Very cute, very great pose. They're very in love. But as you can see, I've got my clippings. So if you recall back, we can see how we're going to have clippings of highlights. If you go up to your histogram in the right-hand corner, there's two little triangles pointing up. The one on the right is your highlight clipping, and the one on your left is going to be your shadow clipping. So we can do both. And I don't really have any shadows. The shadows are going to come up as blue. I don't have any. We pretty much have the highlight clipping because of the way the sun was backlit coming through the trees. I'm not that fully concerned about it because if I take it off, they're in the bokeh. They're in the very background. I'm not that concerned about recovering it, especially if my recovering is going to affect the skin tones of the people I have in front of me. So let's do this very first. Let's identify what is wrong with the picture. Most of the time, it's because it is underexposed. Now, you're wondering, but you shoot manual, shouldn't it be exposed correctly? It kind of depends on the situation. With the camera that I shoot with, the sensor is very, very, very sensitive. I could be on lowest ISO, even when I'm in full shade, I could be on lowest ISO, but because I like to have great depth of field, my aperture is going to be down around 2.5 like I have in this shot, or 1.4. When I have that large of a opening for my aperture, because I want that shallow depth of field, I'm going to have a lot more light coming in. In order to compensate for that, especially with weddings when I don't want to blow out a white wedding dress, I tend to have to pull down my exposure a stop or two. I don't recommend this all the time. Only when I absolutely want to achieve that depth of field, or else I'm going to manipulate it. I'm going to use my triangle. I'm going to move up my f-stop number and close down the aperture opening. But anyway, so for this case, I'm at a 2.5. It was very wide open, a lot of light coming in, even though I was on the lowest ISO and I was on a low f-stop number. I've got a lot of light. So the first thing that I want to do, though, is I've got the brightness in the background, but I'm a little underexposed because I needed to compensate for that light. So the very first thing I want to do is pull up my exposure. The great thing about RAW is that I can use the fill light. Because if you notice, I'm going to pull back down the fill light and the exposure. If you watch in her face, their faces are very dark. And a lot of that is the darkness because they're so close together, there's not a lot of light coming in. I like to use the fill light and pull the fill light in. Now the problem with this is if you bring in too much fill light, their face starts to look almost a ruddy, powdery. I'm not even really sure how to explain it. It's almost like a plasticky look. So you don't always want to do too much. So let's pull up the exposure a little bit and kind of just eye it. You can see my highlights are going absolutely crazy. I could probably do one click with a recovery and get most of them gone. The ones that I'm mostly concerned about are the ones right around their face. If you see there's a clipping right in between them, I'm not too concerned about it, but it is bothering me since I am looking at the highlights. If I take my highlights off, not that concerned. Now see how it's a very cool picture. I could adjust my warmth here if I wanted to. I'm not going to. One of the things that I have done as I have been doing this with many sessions at high volume, I have created my own actions. I'm not going to show you actions. I'm going to break down the steps that I do from here on out for you guys. That way you can see how the actual steps that I take, but I have created them into actions in Photoshop, and that way I can just run them, and it's the same steps that I pretty much do on every picture. That being said, can't run actions in Camera Raw. You just basically have to do these full steps. So the very first thing I look at is the recovery of my highlights or shadows. Then I go into my fill light exposure, and then I want to bring up my blacks some. I'm still looking a little washed out. Let's bring up some blacks. Let's go back down to 0 and look at it. Okay, it's bringing up some blacks. We're just filling in the blacks. It's giving us a little bit more richness of color. I like it. It's good. I can mess with the clarity, vibrance, and saturation. I don't do a lot of it in the Camera Raw because I have developed the other actions for that. But if you wanted to play around, you could add a little saturation since it does look a little washed out. But let me just play back and forth. Let me see if I'm saturated a lot. Now that's another thing to be careful of. Saturation is automatically going to saturate the color that's in front of you. I haven't applied my warming filter yet. So look what happened to the grass. I went from a very dull grass, which was okay because my focus wasn't the grass. But look when I pull up saturation. It's making like this fluorescent green grass. Now it made the skin colors okay. Not 100% happy. They're a little orange. But it made the people a little bit more brighter, but it also made the grass a lot more fluorescent, took my eyes away from them. So that's another reason I don't want to use sliders because I can't mask back here. I'm just going to use a little bit of the saturation slider. Let's look at the clarity. Yeah, pull up the clarity just a little bit. And then from there, pretty simple open image. So always remember, just like when I taught you guys for editing RAW before, fill, light, exposure, recovery. Those are the 3 main sliders that I work with. But for me personally, I always up the blacks. Now, say you have a picture that you've shot and there's a lot of haze. You may not always be able to recover it with the recovery slider. One of the tricks that I have learned is to up your blacks. You can pull down your exposure, up your blacks some. Not always going to work, but it may. Kind of just have to play with it and see what you come up with. No 2 pictures are going to be edited alike, except in the same session, of course. But you could have completely different settings and a completely different location, and using the exact numbers that I have used in my sliders here may not work the same. So just work with it. If you have any questions, just let me know.